You are not actually alone right now. There are people in your life, maybe even people in the next room, people who know your name, who would answer if you called, who would say, without hesitation, that they care about you. And yet, something is missing. Not people, something else, something quieter and harder to name. And the fact that you cannot name it somehow makes it worse. This is the loneliness nobody talks about. Not the loneliness of having no one. The loneliness of being surrounded and still feeling invisible. It shows up in ordinary moments. You are at a dinner with people you have known for years, and the conversation moves around you like water around a stone, present, continuous, and somehow not quite touching you. You laugh at the right moments. You contribute. You perform, effortlessly, the role of someone who is fine. And then you drive home, and something settles in, a quiet, familiar heaviness, and you think, why do I feel so empty after spending time with people? And then, because there is no clean answer, you put it away. You have probably done this for a long time. Put it away. Told yourself it was tiredness, or introversion, or just a difficult week. Told yourself that everyone feels this way, and that it doesn't mean anything, and that you should be grateful for the people you have. All of those things may be true, and none of them quite reach the thing you are actually feeling. Because the thing you are actually feeling is not ingratitude. It is not antisocial behavior. It is a specific, recognizable, deeply human ache for something most people spend their entire lives approaching without ever fully arriving. What that thing is, and why it has become so hard to find, and what has quietly been happening to your ability to connect, that is what this is about. Not in the abstract, not as a concept, as something that is happening specifically to you, in your real life, in the rooms you already occupy, with the people you already have. And by the end, the heaviness you feel driving home from places you should have enjoyed might finally have a name. There is a distinction that almost never gets made, but changes everything once you see it. Alone is a physical state. It simply means no other people are present. Lonely is something completely different. Lonely is a felt experience, a gap between the connection you need and the connection you actually have. And the critical thing to understand is that these two things have almost nothing to do with each other. You can be alone and feel completely at peace. You can be in a crowd and feel it, that particular cold, the one that has nothing to do with temperature. The loneliness that lives inside company. Psychologists have known this for decades. Loneliness is not measured by how many people are around you. It is measured by the quality of what passes between you and them. It is measured by whether you feel known, whether the version of you that shows up in the room is anywhere close to the version of you that actually exists. When those two things are close together, when who you are and who you present are roughly the same, connection becomes possible. When they are far apart, when the gap between the real you and the performed you has grown wide, you can be surrounded by love and still feel utterly alone. This is why the standard advice, go out more, see your friends, don't isolate, so often fails to reach the feeling. Because the feeling is not about quantity. It was never about quantity. You could add 10 more people to the dinner table, and the heaviness on the drive home would be identical. More people, more conversations, more social contact. None of it touches the actual wound, which is not about presence. It is about depth, about whether anyone in the room is actually meeting you, and whether you are actually letting them. Loneliness is not the absence of people. It is the absence of being truly met. And those are two very different problems, with two very different solutions. Understanding this distinction is the beginning of something important. Because if loneliness is about being met, about genuine contact between two real people, then the question is no longer, how do I find more people? The question becomes something harder and more honest. Am I showing up as someone who can actually be met? Am I present enough? Am I real enough? Am I letting the people already in my life close enough to actually reach me? And if not, why not? That is the question that, in one form or another, every chapter of this is quietly building toward. There was a time, for most people, when connection felt simpler. Not necessarily easier, but simpler. You were a child, and you played beside another child, and within 20 minutes you were friends, in the complete and uncomplicated way that children are friends. No audition, no evaluation, No careful management of how much of yourself you revealed. You were simply present, and they were simply present, and that was enough. Something happened to that. Not overnight. Gradually, quietly, through 1,000 small lessons that the world teaches about what is safe to show and what is not. You learned that too much enthusiasm was embarrassing, that certain feelings were inconvenient, that being too honest made people uncomfortable, that the version of you that was too loud, or too sad, or too needy, or too much, tended to create distance, and that the version of you that was measured and managed and appropriately presented tended to be more acceptable. And so, slowly, you moved inside. The child who made friends in 20 minutes became the adult who spends 20 minutes deciding whether it is safe to say what they actually think. That distance between the impulse and the expression is where loneliness lives. Connection stopped feeling like connection, not because people changed, but because your relationship to risk changed. Real connection requires exposure. It requires showing something unedited, something that could be rejected, misunderstood, or received poorly. And somewhere along the way, the cost of that exposure started to feel too high. So you began to offer, instead, a curated version. A version that had been checked for safety before it left your mouth. A version that was real, but not all the way real. And the people across from you, receiving this careful version, could not quite reach you. Not because they didn't want to. Because there was a glass wall they couldn't see, and you had installed it yourself. This is not a personal failure. It is an almost universal adaptation to a world that regularly punishes vulnerability and rewards performance. But it has a cost. The cost is that you can spend years surrounded by people who genuinely care about you and feel, in the deepest sense, unknown. Because the parts of you that most need to be known are precisely the parts you have learned to keep out of reach. And the connection you experience, however warm, however consistent, is always happening at the surface. While somewhere deeper, the real you waits. There is a particular performance that most people have mastered so completely, they no longer experience it as performance. It is the performance of being fine. It runs in the background of almost every social interaction, adjusting your tone, softening your edges, smoothing out the difficult parts of what you actually feel before they reach the surface. You have been doing it so long, so automatically, that the performance and the performer have become almost impossible to separate. "I'm fine" is the most repeated lie in the human language. Not because people intend to deceive, but because, somewhere along the way, they forgot there was another option. Think about the last time someone asked how you were, and you told them the truth. Not the social truth, not the acceptable, manageable, presentable version of the truth, but the actual truth. What you were actually carrying. What was actually difficult. What you were actually afraid of. For most people, that moment is difficult to locate. Not because nothing is wrong, but because the habit of saying "I'm fine" runs so deep and so fast that the honest answer rarely makes it to the surface before the performed one has already arrived. And the performed answer is reinforced constantly. When you say you are fine, the conversation moves forward smoothly. No one is burdened. No one is uncomfortable. The social contract is maintained. But something else happens too, something subtle and cumulative. Every time you perform fine, when you are not fine, the distance between your actual experience and the experience you share with others grows slightly wider. The glass wall gets slightly thicker, and the person on the other side of the conversation sees slightly less of you. And the loneliness, with no visible source, deepens. The performance protects you from the discomfort of being seen, but it also protects you from the only thing that actually heals loneliness, which is being seen. It is the same wall, doing two opposite jobs simultaneously. What makes this particularly hard to interrupt is that being fine often feels genuinely like the right choice. You don't want to burden people. You don't want to seem fragile. You don't want to make things awkward. These are not irrational concerns. They reflect real social dynamics. But they also reflect a belief, installed early and never fully examined, that your actual experience is too much. That the real you, unedited and unperformed, will be met with discomfort rather than connection. And that belief, more than any external circumstance, is what is keeping you alone, in the middle of a room full of people who would, if you let them, actually want to know you. There is a specific moment in most people's lives when they learned that honesty was dangerous. It was probably not dramatic. It was probably small. You said something true, something real, something that mattered to you, and the response was wrong. You were dismissed or laughed at, or told you were being too sensitive, or met with a silence that felt like rejection. And in that moment, without any conscious decision being made, a lesson was learned. Say less. Filter more. The real version is not safe. From that point forward, a process began that most people never notice, because it happens gradually and feels like wisdom. You started editing yourself before you spoke, running a quick internal check. Will this be well received? Is this appropriate? Will this make me look too vulnerable, too intense, too strange? The editing felt responsible. It felt like social awareness. But it was also, quietly and steadily, dismantling your ability to be known. Because you can only be known through what you actually express. And if what you actually express has been pre-approved for safety, then what people are getting to know is not you. It is your editor. The version of you that never says the wrong thing, also never says the true thing. And a self that cannot say true things cannot be truly met. You see this in conversations that leave you feeling vaguely hollow. You talked for an hour. Nothing important was said. You covered work and weather and plans and mutual acquaintances. And at no point did the conversation touch anything that was actually on your mind. The thing you have been thinking about for weeks, the worry that keeps surfacing at 2 a.m., the feeling you can't quite articulate, but that is always present, just beneath the ordinary surface of the day. That thing never came up, not because there wasn't space, because you didn't bring it, because you have learned, systematically, not to. The conversations that heal loneliness are not the long ones, or the frequent ones. They are the ones where something true was said and received. One honest sentence, met with genuine recognition, does more than 100 hours of surface-level talk. This is not a call to overshare, or to make every conversation a confessional, or to burden people with everything you carry. It is a call to notice, the next time you edit yourself, what you are editing out, and to ask whether what you are protecting yourself from is actually as dangerous as it feels. Because the rejection you fear from saying something real is often not what arrives. What often arrives, when something true is said carefully and honestly, is the quiet, startling recognition. Me too. I thought I was the only one. And in that moment, the glass wall cracks, just slightly, and two people, who were alone in their separate performances, briefly become something else. There are people in your life, right now, who want to be closer to you than you are letting them. This may be difficult to hear, not because it feels wrong, but because it feels uncomfortably accurate. People who have tried, in the ways they know how, to reach you, and found something in the way. Not hostility, not rejection, something more subtle, and in some ways more difficult to navigate, a consistent, polite, warmly maintained distance. You are friendly toward these people. You enjoy their company, in the managed way you enjoy most company. You respond to their messages, show up to their events, laugh at their stories. From the outside, the relationship looks functional, even warm. But something is never quite offered. They ask how you are, and you tell them the surface version. They try to go deeper, and you redirect, smoothly, back to safer ground. They share something vulnerable, and you respond with warmth, but offer nothing equivalent in return. And slowly, over time, they learn the shape of the space you have created, and they stop trying to go beyond it. The distance you maintain to protect yourself is experienced by others as a closed door. They knock. They hear warmth from the other side, and they eventually stop knocking, not because they stopped caring, but because the door never opened. This is one of the loneliest dynamics that exists, and one of the least visible. Because from the inside, you are not aware of closing a door. You are aware of feeling guarded, of being careful, of protecting yourself from something that feels like risk. From the inside, the wall is yours, and you know it is there. But from the outside, all people experience is the result, the sense that you are present but not quite reachable, that the relationship has a ceiling, and that no matter how they try, they cannot get past it. And that ceiling, which you installed for reasons that once made complete sense, is now one of the primary sources of the loneliness you are trying to escape. The painful irony of this pattern is that the very behavior designed to protect you from rejection, keeping people at a managed distance, produces a version of the thing it was trying to prevent. The people who cannot reach you eventually stop reaching. Not dramatically, not with anger or announcement. They simply redirect their energy toward people who let them in. And you are left, again, in the familiar position, surrounded, present, involved in the social rituals of friendship, and alone in the way that matters. Understanding this is not a reason for self-criticism. It is an invitation to ask, what would it cost to open the door, just slightly, and see who is still standing there? There is something that happened so gradually and so completely that most people did not notice it happening. The moments that used to be occupied by presence, by quiet, by boredom, by the particular discomfort of sitting with your own thoughts, were filled, not with more people or more meaningful experience, with a screen, with an infinite, frictionless, always available stream of content, connection, and stimulation. And something in those moments was lost. Your phone did not just fill your time. It replaced something. The question is what? It replaced the pause, the gap between one thought and the next, the boredom that used to force your mind inward, toward what you actually felt, what you actually needed, what was actually unresolved. It replaced the particular discomfort of sitting across from someone in silence and letting the silence be real rather than reaching for your pocket. It replaced the slow, sometimes awkward, often necessary work of being genuinely present with something faster, smoother, and far less demanding. And the less demanding thing, used consistently, atrophied something. It also replaced a specific quality of longing. Before the phone, when you missed someone, you felt them missing. It was uncomfortable, and it motivated real action, a call, a visit, a letter, a conversation that had weight because the absence had been felt. Now, you can send a message in 12 seconds, receive a reaction, and have the longing briefly satisfied, without anything real having passed between you. The hunger is fed just enough to prevent real action, but the food has no nutrition. And over time, the deep hunger for genuine contact, for real knowing, for the kind of exchange that actually reaches you, goes quietly, chronically, unfed. You are more connected than any generation in history, and you are lonelier. These two facts are not a coincidence. They are a direct exchange. Superficial contact at scale, traded for depth. And the brain, which cannot tell the difference between real connection and the simulation of it, is left running on empty. This is not an argument to abandon technology or to pretend the phone has no value. It is an argument to notice what you reach for it instead of. The next time you are sitting with someone and the conversation hits a pause and your hand moves toward your pocket, notice that impulse. Not to judge it, to understand it. Because what you are moving away from, in that moment, is exactly the kind of present, slightly uncomfortable, deeply real contact that is the only known antidote to the specific loneliness you are carrying. The discomfort of the pause is where connection actually lives. And you have been escaping it every time, without realizing what you were leaving behind. There is a form of loneliness that is not about being ignored or excluded or left out. It is almost the opposite of those things. It is the loneliness of being fully included, present, visible, engaged with, and still feeling that the version of you, being engaged with, is not quite the real one. It is the loneliness of being misread, of having people respond warmly to something you did not quite mean, or misinterpret something you said, or understand your joke, but miss the sadness underneath it, of saying something and watching it land wrong. Not cruelly, just not quite right. This is one of the most disorienting experiences available, because it looks, from the outside, like connection. People are responding. They are engaged. They are present. But from the inside, there is a gap between what was offered and what was received, between what you meant and what they understood. And in that gap, a particular kind of isolation lies, one that is especially difficult to name because the evidence suggests everything is fine. People are there. They are talking to you. They seem to understand you. And yet, something essential has not been transmitted. To be misunderstood by people who don't care about you is tolerable. To be misunderstood by people who do, that is a loneliness that cuts differently. Most people respond to this by communicating less. If being misunderstood hurts, then offering less of yourself reduces the surface area for misreading. You become more careful, more strategic. You stick to the parts of yourself that tend to translate well and keep the parts that don't safely out of view. And this is entirely understandable. And it is also, precisely, the mechanism by which you become, over time, genuinely unknown, not because people don't care, but because you have stopped offering the material that would allow them to know you. The parts of you that are hardest to explain are the parts that most need expression, not because they need to be understood perfectly, but because the attempt to share them and the experience of someone genuinely trying to receive them is itself a form of connection that nothing else can replicate. Being understood is not always possible. People are complex, language is imperfect, and even the most careful communication often lands somewhere different from where it was aimed. But there is a difference between trying to be understood and accepting imperfect reception and stopping the attempt altogether. One is honest engagement with the limits of connection. The other is withdrawal dressed as realism. And withdrawal, however reasonable it feels, always moves in one direction, deeper into the quiet room where you live inside your own head, surrounded by the full, unedited version of yourself, with no one else allowed to visit. Not all loneliness is the same intensity. There are certain people, specific people, in your actual life, who consistently, reliably, leave you feeling more alone after you have spent time with them. Not because they are cruel, often because they are not. They are perfectly pleasant. They mean well. But something in the interaction consistently depletes you, leaves you with less, somehow, than you arrived with. And you have probably spent time wondering what that means and whether it reflects something wrong with them or something wrong with you. It is usually neither. It is usually a mismatch in depth. There are people who primarily operate at the surface, who are comfortable with social interaction as a kind of enjoyable, frictionless exchange of pleasantries and shared opinions. And there are people who need something more porous, more real, more willing to go somewhere uncomfortable. When these two types spend time together, the surface person feels fine afterward. The depth person feels hollow, not because anything cruel occurred, because the depth person's actual hunger was never on the menu. Spending time with the wrong people, not bad people, just mismatched people, can make loneliness worse than spending time alone. Because at least alone, you are not performing. At least alone, the hunger is honest. This matters because many people, in an attempt to address loneliness, fill their schedule with social contact, any social contact, without distinguishing between interactions that actually feed them and interactions that simply occupy the time. And occupied time can feel like connection while actually functioning as a distraction from the real need. You come home from a full evening of being around people and feel more lonely than before you left, and you cannot understand why, because you followed all the right instructions. You went out, you socialized, you were present. But you were present in the wrong room, with people whose version of togetherness did not reach the part of you that needed reaching. The question this raises is uncomfortable but necessary. Who, in your life, do you feel genuinely less alone around? Not just entertained, not just pleasantly distracted, actually less alone, as if the gap between your inner experience and the outer world, briefly, narrowed. If you can identify those people, even one or two, then the work is clear. Not to find more people, to go deeper with the ones who are already capable of receiving you, and to spend less of your finite energy in rooms that leave you, every time, driving home, in silence, wondering why nothing quite reached you. There is a specific tiredness that has nothing to do with how much sleep you got. It arrives after social interaction, sometimes even after interactions that went well, that you enjoyed, that you would describe as positive. A kind of bone-level fatigue, as though something essential was spent in the process of being around people, something that takes time and quiet and being alone to slowly recover. And if you feel this regularly, you may have concluded that you are simply introverted, that people drain you, that solitude is your natural state. Sometimes that is accurate, but sometimes, and this is the part worth examining, the exhaustion is not from being around people. It is from the effort of being around them, from the continuous, low-level work of managing how you are perceived, of monitoring what you say, and how you say it, of tracking the social currents in the room and adjusting accordingly, of maintaining the performance of being fine, or being engaged, or being the version of yourself that this particular group of people has come to expect. That is exhausting. Not people, the performance that people require. If social interaction is consistently exhausting, the question worth asking is not, am I an introvert? It is, how much of myself am I spending to be acceptable in this room? Genuine connection with people you can be real with does not reliably produce that exhaustion. It can be tiring in the way any meaningful thing is tiring, in the way a real conversation that goes somewhere deep leaves you feeling spent, but also, strangely, more alive. The tiredness that follows real connection feels different from the tiredness that follows performance. One feels like the aftermath of something that mattered. The other feels like the aftermath of labor, of work done, a role played, a shift completed. And if most of your social life feels like the second kind, if you are regularly coming home from people and feeling like you just finished a shift, that is worth paying attention to. You are not necessarily drained by people. You may be drained by the version of yourself you have to become to be around them. And the solution is not fewer people. It is finding people around whom less performance is required. This is one of the most actionable insights in everything being explored here. Because the exhaustion is a signal. It is the body's way of reporting, accurately, how much energy the interaction cost relative to what it returned. When the cost consistently exceeds the return, when you spend more than you receive every time, the exhaustion is not a personality trait. It is feedback. And feedback, when listened to honestly, points towards something. The need for relationships where the performance is lower and the realness is higher. Where being there does not cost you the rest of the evening to recover from. You don't want more people. You want one person, maybe two, who know the actual version of you, who have seen something unedited and did not leave. That is the whole hunger. It is simpler than it looks, and it is harder to feed than anything else. The difficulty is that this hunger is almost never named directly. It gets expressed sideways, as a vague restlessness, as irritability after social events, as a fantasy of a different life where you would somehow feel less alone. It gets medicated with scrolling and snacking and binge-watching and keeping busy, all of which briefly suppress the sensation without touching what is underneath. And because the hunger is never named, it is never addressed. You remain full of its substitutes and empty of the thing itself. Naming it changes something. When you can say, not just feel, but actually articulate, I need to be known. I need real contact. I need someone to encounter the actual me and stay. You have done something important. You have given the hunger a shape. And a hunger with a shape can be taken seriously. It can be brought, carefully, into the presence of the people in your life who might be capable of meeting it. Not all of them. Probably not most of them. But somewhere, in the life you already have, there are people who are hungry for exactly the same thing, who are also driving home from social events, wondering why nothing quite reached them. And the only thing standing between you and them is the willingness to go first. Beneath the surface of the loneliness, beneath the hollow feeling after social events, the exhaustion of performance, the glass wall, the misread moments, there is a specific hunger. Not for more people, or more contact, or more interaction. For something much more precise. The hunger is to be known, fully, without editing. To have the complete, unmanaged, sometimes inconsistent, occasionally difficult version of yourself received. Not fixed, not evaluated, not handled carefully, simply received, seen, and not found wanting. This is one of the deepest human needs. Psychologists call it matching, the experience of being genuinely significant to someone, not for what you produce or perform, but for what you actually are. It is different from being liked. Being liked is often about the performance. Matching is about what's underneath it, and the distinction is felt immediately. You can be in a room full of people who like you, and the hunger is still there, because what they like is the edited version. The thing you are hungry for only gets fed when someone encounters something real and chooses to stay. You have probably experienced it at least once. Maybe briefly, maybe years ago. A conversation that went somewhere unexpected, a moment where something real was said by you, or by the other person, and something in the air shifted. The performance dropped just slightly. And for a few minutes, two people were actually present with each other, not performing presence, but inhabiting it. And you left that conversation feeling something different from the usual hollow. You felt, for a moment, less alone. Not in a dramatic way. In a quiet, almost physical way, like a tightness you had stopped noticing, briefly released. That feeling, that specific release, is not a luxury. It is not a bonus. It is a fundamental human requirement. And the fact that it is rare is the real crisis. When someone finally sees you, when something real passes between two people without being intercepted by performance or filtered through social management, something neurological actually happens. The nervous system responds. Cortisol drops. Oxytocin rises. The body, which has been maintaining vigilance, monitoring for threat, managing presentation, tracking social signals, briefly relaxes. And in that relaxation, there is an experience so unfamiliar to most adults that it can feel almost startling. The experience of being safe in someone's presence. Not just comfortable, actually safe. This is what you are hungry for. Not the performance of togetherness, the dinners and the events and the group chats, but this. The moment where the glass wall is briefly not there. Where what you offered was received accurately. Where you said something true and it landed, and the person across from you said, without the words, I know. I see that. Me too. These moments are not guaranteed. They cannot be manufactured or scheduled, but they can be made more likely by the willingness to offer something real in a context where real things are possible. By choosing the right rooms, and by staying in the discomfort of genuine contact long enough for something true to happen. You have felt it before. That brief, quiet relief of being known. The fact that you can remember it, that you know exactly what I'm describing, means you are capable of it. The question is not whether you can get there. The question is what you are willing to offer to make it possible again. And here is what makes this both difficult and hopeful at the same time. The seeing tends to be mutual. When you lower the performance, when you say something true, when you let something real through, the person across from you often does the same. Not always, but often, because most people are carrying the same hunger. Most people are also driving home from rooms that didn't quite reach them. Most people are also waiting, without realizing they are waiting, for someone to go first. And going first is terrifying. And it is also the only way. There is a phrase for the experience that has been described throughout all of this. The loneliness inside company, the performance of fine, the glass wall, the hollow drives home. The phrase is, being a guest in your own life. Present everywhere, belonging nowhere, moving through rooms and relationships and conversations as a skilled, warmly received, fundamentally external presence. Never quite arriving at the place where you are not a guest, but a resident. Where you are not performing belonging, but actually experiencing it. Everything described in this conversation, the editing, the performance, the distance, the phone, the wrong rooms, the exhaustion, all of it is a form of guest behavior. It is the behavior of someone who has learned, from experience, that full presence is risky, that being fully there, fully real, fully available, fully willing to be known, opens you to the full range of outcomes, including the painful ones. And so you remain slightly outside, close enough to feel the warmth, far enough to make a quick exit. And the cost of that positioning is that you never fully arrive. You never stop being a visitor in spaces that could, with a different choice, be home. The loneliness is not coming from the absence of people. It is coming from the absence of you, the full you, the one who stopped showing up, gradually, quietly, for reasons that made sense, and never quite found the way back. Coming back does not require a dramatic gesture. It does not require a difficult conversation, or a painful confrontation with your past, or a radical transformation of your personality. It requires something smaller, and in some ways more difficult. The next time you are with someone who might be capable of real contact, someone who has knocked on the door before, try saying one thing that is actually true. Not everything, not the most frightening thing. One thing, slightly more real than what you would normally offer. And then, notice what happens. Not in the other person, in you. Notice what it feels like to let something through. Because you have been a guest long enough. The rooms are familiar. The routes are memorized. You know exactly how to move through them without touching anything real. And you are tired of it. Tired in the specific way that comes from being very good at something. That was never what you actually wanted. You are not meant to be a visitor in your own existence. You are not meant to know the loneliness of a crowded room. What you are hungry for, to be known, to be seen, to be met without the performance, is possible. Not everywhere, not with everyone, but somewhere, with someone. Starting with the willingness to stop editing yourself, just enough for the real thing to finally get through.